Warning, this video features opinions. You have been warned. Also, maybe some minor spoilers. Some very minor, very tiny, teensy-weensy little, teensy-wee. I've been wanting to make a video regarding the Fabula Nova Crystallis project for a while now. The reason why is that I just can't keep a straight opinion when it comes to Final Fantasy XIII. It's easy for me to say I didn't like it, but every time I see gameplay footage or hear some of the music, I instantly go, "That game's alright." And I remember I enjoyed it while playing it for the first time. Still, I somehow got stuck with the opinion of not liking it afterwards. And because of that, I never bothered to play 13-2. Now, Lightning Returns came out a while ago and that kinda sparked my interest, which got me to think about all this stuff I just mentioned. So I thought it'd be a good idea to replay Final Fantasy XIII and kinda reevaluate my opinion. And then play the other two games as well. I also kinda wanted to create a nice discussion amongst fans. I haven't really seen anyone discuss all of the 13 games as a whole, so I thought I'd try my hand at it. So yeah. Here's my review of the Fabula Nova Crystallis project. This took so long to make. First off, I'd like to start on a positive note. I actually like Lightning. A common complaint was that she was too grumpy or just a female Cloud. And where I do agree there are some similarities, I wouldn't go as far as to say that she's just a copy-pasted Cloud. Far from it, actually. To me, she doesn't seem like the grumpy, distant character a lot of people make her out to be. Sure, yeah, it kinda starts off that way, but I'd be grumpy too if I'd had to hang around with people like... The whole cause of grump is completely different from Cloud as well. Cloud had years of trauma and the whole fake personality thing going on, whereas Lightning is just overly irked by the situation she's in. A bit of an overreaction possibly, but still. Out of all characters in the game, I found her to be the most relatable. And the whole distant act drops after the first few hours or 6, which isn't even half of the game. Especially when she's conversing with Hope. I really like how they flashed that out, the whole Hope and Lightning growing together thing. It's done in a surprisingly sober manner, especially compared to how the rest of the game tugs along. You see, with most of the emotional moments they keep using the main theme of the game, and seriously, fuck that song. It makes everything incredibly corny and melodramatic. It's hard to get into everything that's going on when they keep reusing the same fucking music for every goddamn scene. What makes the whole deal with Hope and Lightning somewhat powerful is because it doesn't have any of that. The thing I always loved about the Final Fantasy series so much is that no matter how sad it got, it never really became melodramatic. Final Fantasy XIII almost feels like a soap in some places, and it makes it really hard for me to relate to any of the characters, especially the scenes with Snow and Sarah. They try so hard to make everything sad by just adding sad music under everything. Maybe it's just me being a heartless bastard, but I don't feel sheepish enough to have my emotions be steered by nothing more than the inclusion of a song. The scenes do look beautiful though. But all this together makes me feel like they're relying more on sparkly bits rather than actual writing to make the scenes more compelling. But as I said, the game does look amazing. Stylistically, it almost reminds me of Final Fantasy VIII in some ways, and to me that's definitely a good thing. It goes for a kinda cyberpunky futuristic vibe, which it combines with a lot of foresty themes. It's pretty cool, although I do find some of the areas a bit too bland. Some of them drag on for really long with little to no change. It's almost like they made a giant dungeon crawler hidden under a layer of adventure. It's just walking in a straight line, fighting fight after fight. I do like how some of the characters run around and do their own little thing as you traverse the somewhat bland locations. It makes everything seem a bit more alive. It is, however, a pity that bit remains but a bitty. There are very little locations with NPCs around and it makes everything feel so empty. Now I know this is partially intentional because they wanted to create the feeling of being a fugitive, but that doesn't make it any more fun to traverse through all these areas. The few towns you do enter aren't really explorable, which is sad because they actually look really cool. They do create a good sense of scale as to how massive the world you're in actually is. It's just a shame you don't really get to see much of it. And I'm not really talking about linearity either, mind you. I don't really care about that. Final Fantasy X was linear as fuck too. But at least there were people everywhere and little events and shops and shit. Whereas here it's just a straight line with a set amount of random encounters. As I just said, I don't mind linearity. Frankly, I'm quite sick of all these games claiming to be open world, while not offering more than a barely active sandbox filled with unenterable buildings. I'd pick a small room with nothing to do in it over a huge room with nothing to do in it any day. And especially when you're trying to tell a story, I'd happily have a linear experience. I mean, look at something like The Last of Us. A linear world can have so much more details and events going on, further immersing you into the world. It's just a shame that Final Fantasy XIII seems to forget all these details and events. The few things you do to break up the monotony is pulling a lever every once in a while, but that's really about it. And the fact that the minimap is there is almost an insult. It even rats out all of the treasure locations. Having those hidden could have added at least some illusion of exploration rather than just outright showing you. Also, some of the areas are so cramped and tight that you just keep bumping against stuff and slightly clipping on edges. Even the camera gets stuck on walls and ledges sometimes. Like I said, some of the areas are beautiful when you enter them for the first time, but soon you see that what you first saw is usually all there is to be seen. And in the end, that just leaves a very bland impression. The only thing that I like about this is that it gives the game a kind of laid-back feel in terms of traversal. It's easy to drift off and kind of dream away, and it makes it so that the game is easy to play for a couple of hours on end. Which, with this being an RPG, is kind of a good thing. At least, it's like that for the first half of the game. But I'll get back to that later. Another big complaint the game got is the battle system. All you do is bash X the whole fucking time and it's bloody gay. Duh. And yeah, the game kinda is like that, though I'm not sure it's just the bashing of the X's that's the issue here. I mean, in a game like Gunstar Heroes, all you do is bash X too. In fact, it's even worse. All you do is hold X. But then, how is it that a lot of people think Gunstars is fun, but the battles in Final Fantasy XIII aren't? I think the big thing here is what the actual pressing of the button does. In 13, it doesn't feel like you're actually doing anything most of the time. It's more like you're watching someone else fight rather than you yourself partaking in the action. Whereas in Gunstars, you press and hold X and... That said, there are some things about the battle system I really like. To me, it's actually quite satisfying to launch an enemy up in the air and then juggle them for as long as possible. The auto heal after battle was pretty nice too, although it does render potions almost completely useless later on in the game. It's also pretty satisfying to get a preemptive strike and just stagger and wipe a big group of enemies off the screen in a matter of seconds. I almost feel like this is the way they wanted the battles to be. Fast-paced and full of action. They looked at Final Fantasy X-2 and Final Fantasy XII and were like, if we combine these two, it'd be awesome. And yeah, I can totally see that. It's just kind of a shame they went about it the wrong way. Or at least, that's how I feel about it. You see, to me the battles just take too long. They're not hard, they're just long and tedious. Sometimes the action falls completely flat as well, and it's just really awkward when it does. The fact you can only control the actions of one character at a time really pisses me off as well. The AI isn't terrible, but to me it isn't great enough to have almost the entire battle system rely on it. I also hate how it's game over when the party leader, i.e. you, dies. Final Fantasy XII had an almost similar concept in terms of controlling the party in battle, but at least in Final Fantasy XII when the leader, i.e. you, died, you got to pick another character to control. The least they could have done is make it so the AI would function around the concept, but they didn't. If another character has less health than the party's leader, even though the party's leader is near death as well, they won't prioritize the leader. They do sometimes, but I feel like that's more a stroke of luck than anything else. Same goes for the enemies. A few enemies have one-hit kill attacks. This wouldn't have been such a big deal if you could have picked another character to control after death, but no. Now it's game over. It almost breaks the entire game at some points, and it randomly ramps up the difficulty in ways it shouldn't. It just isn't fair. And most boss fights are just incredibly boring. Final Fantasy is known for having really long, hard, and epic boss battles. In 13, they're just long. They barely pose a challenge, and when they do, it's usually because of a random party member shift which completely fucks up your paradigm setup. The Eidolon battles do this especially. Most of them are almost impossible first time around because of the paradigms you get are just really stupid. Luckily, dying isn't that big of a deal when you end up exactly where you were. And with boss battles, you get to change your setup of your paradigm should the game screw you over with a random party change. Still, I feel like all of this could have been avoided with a smarter designed system. Not that I don't like the paradigm system at all, it's just that bullshit like this really holds it back a lot. But yeah, the battles are just kinda dull most of the time. They can get a bit more interesting with some battles involving certain status elements and debuffs and stuff like that, but even then it's usually nothing a quick paradigm shift can't solve. I really like the fact that the characters you don't use still get EXP. I mean, CP as well. I've always hated having completely underleveled characters and then having to grind a lot or ignore it only to have you get screwed over big time when the story forces you to use them at some point. Maybe I'm just a filthy casual, and all the JRPG purists get mad over this, but I honestly like the addition. I do find the paradigm system a bit too simple. That said, I do find it a nice variation to the sometimes overcomplex systems Final Fantasy games tend to have. While I do love both games, I feel like Final Fantasy VIII and XII have a bit too much complexity in their systems. That said, the thing I didn't like too much about VIII's system is the fact that every time the party changes, your setup gets fucked up, and as I just said, I have the same problem with XIII. A lot of people complained that the Crystarium is too linear. Kinda like it's a really linear version of the sphere grid. And I kinda see where they're coming from, and I've thought about this for quite some time, but to me it isn't really anything like the sphere grid. The sphere grid, and in some way also the license board from 12, kinda lets you decide where you take your characters. And the Crystarium doesn't really let you do any of that at all. But if you think about it, neither did Final Fantasy IX. That's because Final Fantasy IX pretty much had a set growth pattern that your characters followed as they leveled up. To me, the Crystarium is a lot more like that. It's more like a visualization of a set growth pattern rather than a free roam skill tree kind of thing. If you think about it that way, it's a lot less of a letdown. At least it was to me. That said, it is set up in a way that your characters all grow in a way that matches the strengths of the enemies. In Final Fantasy IX, there were still some points where you'd have to grind to make it easier on yourself. I mean, 13 grinding is pretty much useless and there really isn't a reason for you to do any of it. Just kill everything in encounter, which is also pre-programmed as there are no random encounters, and you should be fine. Except for the part where you first reach Grand Pulse, but I'll get back to that later. I guess it kinda depends what kind of player you are, whether or not you like this edition or not. Personally, I'm not big into the whole grinding bit, and I'm mainly in it for the adventure, so I really was okay with this. That said, when you exit and re-enter an area, the enemies do respawn, so maybe they did intend for this. One thing that kinda bugged me about the stat progression was the weapon upgrade system. I mean, I like the fact you can upgrade your weapons, it's just that because of it I never felt the need to switch weapons. Every new weapon I found was inferior to the gear I already had because of the upgrades. Maybe I was just doing it the wrong way. In fact, I'm pretty sure I did. But I had no problem killing everything, so it didn't really matter. It all just seemed a bit strange to me, but maybe they intended it like this. There's also a few small things that bothered me. Like the weird stalk sound that Fang's staff makes. Or the severe lack of dangly parts in the character designs.
Haha! Dangly parts.
Apart from Tidus's clothes, I pretty much always liked all of the character designs in Final Fantasy games. But here, some of the designs just seem a little bit bland to me. Especially Snow and Hope look a little dull in my opinion. Again, the only character I really liked in terms of design was Lightning. I think the absence of either Yoshitaka Earrings Amano or Tetsuya Belt Buckles Nomura as main character designers had something to do with this. They've both received a lot of flack over their years for their sometimes androgynous or feminine male character designs, but I've always really liked those, to be honest. I'm also really annoyed by the exclamation marks everywhere in the menu. They set off my OCD hardcore and I really just need to get rid of all of them every time I open the menu. It's really annoying and I'm almost 100% sure I'm not the only one who had to deal with this. It wouldn't have been such a big deal if it was only the first of everything, but it happens with every single potion or whatever that you get. This also makes the bestiary a pain because every enemy you encounter shows up in there and every single one of them gets their own little exclamation mark. This also goes for every event, character, or location you stumble upon. I guess you could consider this nitpicking, but it does take up a lot of your time playing having to go through every single little thing and it's just kind of annoying. I do really like the recaps you get every time you start playing. They actually help and in my opinion every story-driven RPG should do this. The only thing I'm really torn about is the soundtrack. As an older Final Fantasy fan, I can't help but comparing it to Nobuo's works, and in my opinion it just doesn't really hold up at all. Which is strange considering the fact that the game uses a lot of ambient music, and I usually really like listening to that. It's just that the before mentioned boring areas don't exactly get any more bearable when the music feels like it's kind of elevator-y in some places. Also, some of the cutscenes feature this bombastic military Hollywood shit movie kind of music, which I really hate. Doesn't have any soul. And as I've already said, I hate the main theme to this game to death, and it's fucking everywhere. It's not even an original composition either. It's a random song from some pop artist no one knows about anymore. She had 1 or 2 hit singles around the time this game came out, but that's really about it, and I have no idea why they went with this song. I'm not even sure if it's actually in the original Japanese version of the game. They've also completely priested the Chocobo theme. It's pretty horrible. Overall, I like parts of the soundtrack. The battle theme's pretty nice, and some of the areas have some nice atmospheric music. Snow's theme is pretty cool too, but it gets used way too often, as do all the songs actually. I guess overuse wouldn't be bad if the songs had a bit more personality to them, but I guess at this point all of it's crying over spilt milk anyway. There is, however, one big thing about this game that just really irks me. I've been avoiding this topic the whole time, but I just can't let it go. To me, it feels like the game dies halfway, the moment you reach Pulse to be exact. The fun already starts to decline before that point. On the Palamecia, the battles start becoming too much for me. What the game does here is that it has one song for the area and it doesn't stop. It keeps going, no battle theme. This, coupled with an insane amount of battles and an alarm that just keeps going, just starts draining all the fun. At this point in the game, I started getting really sick of the battles. I did on my first playthrough and I did now. It just keeps going and going all the way through this chapter, and it does so in the next one as well. And then you go to Pulse. At first, this kind of feels like a breath of fresh air. But soon, when the side quests get involved, it continues. The endless battles with no downtime. No towns to explore to take a load off. It just keeps going and going and going and going. And here, at this halfway point, to me, the game just dies. I wouldn't say that this is the worst Final Fantasy game to date. It certainly isn't my least favorite in the series. It is, however, to me, the most boring one. It's alright, but there's just a lot wrong with it, which makes it hard for me to love it as much as I do with any of the other titles. Then again, this does come from someone who looks at this game and compares it to the older ones. Maybe if this was my first game in the series, this would be my favorite and I wouldn't be bothered by all of these things. Who knows? Anyway, Square did keep an eye out for us older fans. Or so they said. They said 13.2 would feature a lot of things the older fans would like. And of course it would also feature things to further widen their audience. Well, I'd say it's about time we moved on from this old carcass and see what 13.2 has to offer. Whoop-de-fucking-do.